everyone. Today's model question is regarding the tides, or more specifically the tidal range, and in this video we'll also take a look at the terms like aphelion, perigee, apogee as well as perihelion, and how do these events influence the tidal range. Now first of all, to start with, what is a tide? The tide means they are periodic rise or fall in the sea level, that we call it as tides. Okay, in the sense periodically the sea level is increasing as well as the sea level is decreasing, falling, and that we call it as tides. And the most important thing you have to remember regarding tides, the predominant factor influencing the formation of tides, they are the gravitational attraction of the moon, right? I mean, I'm not saying the sun is not influencing the tides, rather than the most predominant factor influencing the formation of tide, they are moon. Okay, in the sense moon is able to attract gravitationally objects on the surface of the earth. In the sense, think about this oceanic water, right? They are not very firmly held over to the earth's surface. So what happens is that when moon is facing the side of the earth, those side facing the moon, moon will be attracting the water towards it. And those regions, as given in this picture, you can see a tidal bulge here, and those regions on the earth's surface will be experiencing the high tide, At the same time, the water from the ocean is all being attracted towards the side facing moon, and the other sides will be experiencing the low tide, So high tide and low tide, high tide will be there, the tidal bulge will be facing the moon, and those regions will be experiencing the high tide. Now coming to the sun's influence, we all know that the gravitational attraction of sun is much greater than that of the moon. But comparing the distance between sun and earth and moon and earth, the gravitational influence on tide, the gravitational influence in creating tides is more for the moon. Okay, so that doesn't mean that the sun is not exerting any influence at all, The sun's position can also influence the height of the tides, height of the high tide as well as the low tide. Anyway, the gravitational attraction of sun as well as the gravitational attraction of moon, they are important factors which control the height of the tides, Moving on to the next topic, like the tidal range, This is another concept. So range means, Range means difference between maximum and minimum of anything, Maybe we are talking about range of temperature, Difference between maximum temperature and minimum temperature. Here, tidal range, okay. So going by the term, the literal meaning, the difference between the high tide and the low tide, and that we call it as like the tidal range, During low tide, the seashore will be exposed, and during high tide it will be covered by oceanic water, And what is the difference between them, and that we call it as tidal range. Now let's take a look at like the terms perihelion, apogee as well as perigee, and how does it influence the tides. Okay, so we all know that the moon is revolving around the earth the same way the earth is revolving around the sun. Okay, so when moon is revolving around the earth, it is not a circular path, rather than it's an elliptical path, in the sense these distances, they are not always same, So what happens is that during certain period, the moon will be closer to the earth, and that we call it as perigee. Okay, and when the moon is furthest away from the sun, and that we call it as apogee. So in this picture, this position denotes the perigee position, and the other picture denotes the apogee position. Now think about the influence during the perigee position and the apogee position on tides, The influence, how do they influence tides? Since moon is closer during the perigee position, It will be exerting more gravitational attraction on the earth's surface, resulting in higher tides, higher high tides, So think about, take this position, the perigee position. So what happens is that this side facing the moon will be experiencing the tidal bulge. At the same time, on the top, all the water is moving towards this side facing the moon. So that means the high tide will be higher than normal, And the low tide, it will be lower than normal. Okay, so that's the influence during the perigee position. At the same time, during the apogee position, the influence of moon is relatively or comparatively reduced, because the moon is furthest away, the gravitational attraction is reduced. Okay, now let's take a look at the perihelion and aphelion, So this is related with the distance between sun and the earth, As I said in the case of perigee and apogee, During perihelion, the earth is in its closest approach to the sun, I mean, again, the sun, Earth is revolving around the sun in an elliptical orbit. So during one particular year, I mean one particular month, during the January, right? During January, what happens is that this Earth will be much closer to the sun, and that we call it as perihelion. And during the aphelion, right, July, this Earth will be much farther away from the sun. So perigee means the moon is closest to the Earth, right? Perihelion means the Earth is closest to sun. Now during the perihelion and aphelion, thinking about their influence on tides, right? When Earth is closest to the sun, right, relatively more gravitational attraction will be exerted by the sun on the Earth, which can influence the formation of tides. So perihelion means, during perihelion position, as we have discussed in the case of perigee, during perihelion, the high tide will be higher than normal and low tide will be lower than normal, right? At the same time, the aphelion means, since the distance has increased, it means like the gravitational influence of sun on the tides, they have been reduced. Okay, so once again briefing through these topics, right? During the perigee and perihelion position, right, the gravitational influence exerted by moon as well as sun is greater, and that can influence, that can result in high tides taking place on the Earth, right? Now going back to the question, so tidal range is greater than normal during, right, and the 4 options have been given here: aphelion, perigee, apogee and perihelion, right? Now during perihelion or perigee position, what happens is that the high tide will be higher than normal, at the same time the low tide will be lower than normal, right? So if the high tide is increasing and the low tide is decreasing, right, the difference between them is increasing. So what happens is that during these particular positions like the perigee as well as perihelion, the tidal range will be higher than normal, right? So here, among the options we can find aphelion as well as apogee, right? Both of them cannot be the answer. The answer here will come out as 2 as well as 4, or you can say the answer is D. During the perigee position and perihelion position, right, the tidal range will be greater than normal.